not sure how everyone feels about porta-potties, but as a guy, I never really minded using them, as long as they weren't flat out gross. For a while, the large city park a few miles from my house had some while the regular bathrooms were undergoing maintenance. I'm a regular at the park. Jogging trails, open fields, and a quiet lake make it the perfect spot to unwind after work or walk my dog Max. When the permanent restrooms got shut down for repairs, the city hauled in 3 porta-potties and lined them up near the parking lot. They weren't anything special, just your standard blue plastic boxes, but they did the job. I'd usually pick the one on the left. It seemed cleaner than the others, and I appreciated that. For the first couple of weeks, everything was fine. The porta-potties were maintained regularly, no overflowing toilets or unbearable stench, and I didn't think twice about using them when I needed to. But then I started noticing something strange about the middle one. Every time I approached the row, no matter the time of day, early morning, midday, or dusk, that middle porta-potty was occupied. The little red in-use indicator was always flipped, and if I listened closely, I could hear faint shuffling or breathing inside. At first I brushed it off. Maybe it was a coincidence, or someone was just taking their sweet time. But it kept happening day after day, and I never once saw anyone walk out. I'm not sure why, but it really started to bug me as time went on. I mean, how could one porta-potty be constantly in use without anyone ever leaving? One afternoon after my jog, I decided to hang around and watch. I sat on a bench about 20 yards away, pretending to scroll through my phone while keeping an eye on that middle door. An hour passed, nothing. No one came out, and no one went in. The sun was dipping below the trees, casting long shadows across the park, and I finally gave up. But as I walked to my car, I glanced back, and the door was still locked tight. That's when I felt the first twinge of unease. The next day, I went back with Max. It was late afternoon, the park buzzing with kids and dog walkers, and I figured I'd use the left porta-potty like usual. As I approached, I noticed something odd. The middle one's door was cracked open just an inch or two. I froze. After weeks of it being locked, this felt off. Curiosity gnawed at me, and against my better judgment, I stepped closer and nudged the door open with my foot. Inside, it was empty. No one was there. The interior looked identical to the others, dingy plastic walls, a toilet seat, and a roll of cheap paper, but the smell hit me like a punch. It wasn't the usual porta-potty funk. It was sharp, metallic, almost like blood mixed with rust. I wrinkled my nose and stepped back, letting the door swing shut. As I turned to leave, I heard it, a soft click. I whipped around. The door was closed again, and the in-use sign was back on. My heart skipped a beat. There was no wind, no one nearby who could have touched it. I told myself it was just a faulty latch and hurried Max back to the car, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. That night I had a nightmare. I was standing in the park alone, in front of that middle porta-potty. The door creaked open on its own, revealing a pitch-black void inside. A pale, bony hand shot out, grabbed my wrist, and yanked me forward. I woke up gasping, my arm tingling where the dream hand had touched me. I chalked it up to my imagination running wild, but the dreams kept coming. Every night, that porta-potty pulled me in, and each time, the grip felt more real. A few days later, I returned to the park. I tried to avoid the porta-potties altogether, but Max tugged me towards the parking lot, and I figured I'd just use the left one quick and get out. However, as I passed the middle one, I noticed something glinting in the dirt nearby, a small, antique-looking key, half buried like it had been dropped. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand. It was rusted, with an intricate design carved into the handle, nothing like a modern key. On a whim, I slid it into the lock of the middle porta-potty. It clicked, and the door popped open. I grabbed my flashlight, thankfully I'd started carrying one, and stepped inside. The metallic smell was stronger now, stinging my nostrils. I swept the beam around, expecting nothing but grime, when I felt the floor shift under my weight. Looking down, I saw a faint outline in the plastic, a trapdoor hidden beneath the toilet seat. My stomach dropped. I knelt and pried it open with trembling hands, then shone the light down. A narrow ladder descended into a dark hole. I know I should have run right then, but something, stupidity maybe, pushed me to climb down. The air below was damp and cold, like a basement that hadn't been opened in years. My flashlight revealed a small chamber, maybe 10 feet across, with dirt walls etched in jagged, unfamiliar symbols. In the center sat a crude stone slab littered with melted candle stubs, animal bones, and stains I didn't want to identify. On the slab was a leather-bound notebook. I flipped it open, and my blood ran cold. It was a diary, written in shaky handwriting. The first page read, Day 1. I don't know where I am. I used the porta-potty at the park, and the floor opened. Now I'm here. There's something down here with me. Whispers in the dark. I can't find the ladder. The entries went on, describing hunger, hallucinations, and a presence that grew closer every day. The last one was scrawled in a panic. "It's at the trapdoor. I hear claws. If you find this, burn it all down. Don't let it take you too." Before I could process what I was reading, a loud bang echoed above me. The trapdoor slammed shut. I spun around, shining my light up, and saw the ladder retracting into the ceiling with a mechanical groan. I was trapped. My breath caught as a low, guttural sound came from the shadows, a mix of a growl and a laugh. I pressed myself against the wall as a figure stepped into the light. It was tall, hunched, with glowing eyes and a twisted grin. But the worst part, it looked like me, a warped, nightmarish version of my own face. "You shouldn't have come here," it hissed, its voice echoing inside my skull. "Now you're mine." I still don't know how I got out. One second it was lunging at me, the next I was waking up in my bed soaked in sweat, the morning sun glaring through my blinds. A dream, I told myself. It was just a dream. But when I rolled over, I saw it, the key sitting on my nightstand. And on my arm, fresh scratches, 3 jagged lines like claw marks. Since then, I haven't gone back to the park. I just can't. But it's also not over. I hear whispers at night and see shadows in the corner of my eye. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I'm back in that chamber, staring at myself. I have no idea what it wants or how to stop it, but I know one thing. If you're ever at a park with porta-potties, watch out for the one that's always occupied. Some doors don't just lock you in, they take you somewhere you can't escape. For a few years I worked in a factory that mostly assembled porta-potties. It was a steady gig, nothing exciting, just a paycheck to keep me afloat. The factory sat on the edge of town, a hulking concrete building surrounded by overgrown weeds and a gravel lot. Inside, it was a maze of conveyor belts, plastic molds, and the sharp smell of industrial cleaner. My job was simple. I test the units after assembly, checking hinges, locks, and seals. Day in, day out, it was the same routine, and I'd gotten pretty good at tuning out the drone of the place. But there was one porta-potty I could never ignore. It wasn't part of the regular production line. It just showed up one day, parked in a shadowy corner near the loading docks. This thing was different, dented and weathered, with a dull maroon color that looked almost black under the fluorescent lights. The plastic was scratched up, covered in faint, swirling marks that didn't make sense, like someone had dragged a nail across it in a frenzy. We all figured it was a return, maybe a defective unit sent back for repairs, but no one touched it. Instead, it just sat there, silent and out of place. I first noticed something off about it during a late shift. The factory was short-staffed, so I'd volunteered to stay past midnight to finish a batch. By 1 a.m., the place was dead quiet, most of the machines were off, and the only sound was the buzz of the overhead lights. I was testing a row of new units when I heard it, a soft rhythmic thud, like something heavy shifting inside a confined space. It was coming from the direction of the maroon porta-potty. I grabbed my flashlight and walked over, figuring maybe a rat had gotten trapped inside. The closer I got, the more uneasy I felt. The air around it seemed colder, heavier, like stepping into a draft no one could explain. I stood in front of the door, just listening. Eventually the thudding stopped, replaced by faint scratching, slow and deliberate, like fingernails dragging across the inside of the walls. My hand hovered over the latch, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. I tried telling myself it was nothing, just the building playing tricks on me, and went back to work. However, the next night things got worse. I was alone again, and the thudding started right on cue, louder this time and more insistent. Again, I tried to ignore it, focusing on my checklist, but then I heard something else, a voice. It was low and garbled, muffled by the thick plastic walls, but it sounded like someone muttering over and over. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was desperate, almost pleading. My skin prickled as I grabbed my flashlight and marched back to the porta-potty, determined to figure it out. The door was cracked open this time, just an inch, though I hadn't noticed it the night before. I shone my light inside. The interior looked normal at first, seat, tank, a roll of cheap toilet paper, but then I saw the floor. It was littered with tiny white shards glinting in the beam. I stepped closer and realized they were teeth. Human teeth, some chipped, some stained yellow, scattered like someone had spilled a handful across the plastic tiles. My stomach lurched and I backed out, slamming the door shut. I reported it to my supervisor the next morning. He laughed it off, saying some joker on the day shift probably planted them as a prank. He promised to check it out, but when I came back that evening, the porta-potty was still there, undisturbed. That night, the noises didn't stop. The thudding turned into banging, the muttering into sharp, guttural cries. I did my best to stay as far away as I could, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was in there knew I was listening. Then a few days later, I found something that pushed me over the edge. I was sweeping the area near the loading docks when my broom caught on a folded piece of paper wedged under the porta-potty. It was old, yellowed, and crinkled, like it had been sitting there for years. I unfolded it and saw a grainy black and white photo of a man in a factory uniform standing in front of a maroon porta-potty that looked exactly like the one in the corner. His face was blurred, almost scratched out, but the date scribbled in the corner read 1978. Below it, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "It won't let me leave." My hand shook as I stuffed the photo into my pocket. That night, the banging was deafening, shaking the walls of the porta-potty like something was trying to claw its way out. The cries turned into screams, raw, animalistic, but unmistakably human. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a wrench from my toolbox and stormed over, ready to pry the thing open and end this nightmare. The door flew open before I could touch it. Inside, the air was thick with dust, swirling in the flashlight beam. The teeth were gone, but the walls were different, covered in deep, frantic scratches that overlapped into a chaotic mess. At the bottom, near the seat, was a dark stain, still wet, pooling like ink. And then I saw it, a handprint pressed into the plastic wall, fingers splayed wide. It was too big to be human, the fingers too long, the palm too broad, like something had melted its mark into the surface. Then the screaming stopped. Silence crashed over me, heavier than the noise. And then, from the tank at the back, where the flush valve should have been, came a slow, wet gurgle. I aimed my light at it, and the beam caught a pair of eyes staring back, pale and unblinking, sunken into a face that wasn't there. My breath caught in my throat as the gurgling turned into a laugh, low and guttural, vibrating through the walls. I dropped the wrench and ran, sprinting through the factory, out the exit, and into the night. I didn't stop until I was in my car, peeling out of the lot with my heart hammering in my chest. I called in sick the next day, then quit over the phone. I told him I'd found another job, but the truth was I just couldn't go back. Not after that. Weeks later, I heard from a buddy who still worked there. He said the maroon porta-potty was gone, vanished overnight, no paperwork and no trace. Management acted like it had never existed, but I know what I saw. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I hear that thudding again, faint but growing closer, like it's searching for me. I keep that photo locked in a drawer, but I can't bring myself to look at it. Whatever was in that porta-potty, it's not done, and I'm terrified it never will be. I took this computer modeling class in college, and for one of the assignments, we had to create an everyday object in Blender. There were minimum requirements that had to be met, so we couldn't do something extremely simple like a ball or a donut. Eventually I decided on making a porta-potty because, why not? The idea seemed random and kind of funny to me, but if only I knew where it would lead. It was a late Tuesday evening, and I was in the computer lab, fine-tuning the details on my porta-potty model. The lab was quiet, the hum of the computers the only sound breaking the silence. Most students had already left for the night, but I wanted to get a head start on the project, and that's when I noticed her. She was sitting a few rows ahead, her brown hair catching the dim light of the overhead fluorescence. She was beautiful, strikingly so, with high cheekbones and an air of quiet intensity. I didn't recognize the woman from class, but something about her drew my attention. She was modeling something on her screen as well, her fingers flying across the keyboard with precision. I tried to focus on my work, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hey," I called out, keeping my tone casual. "What are you working on?" She didn't look up, but her voice was smooth and deliberate. The porta-potty. I blinked, genuinely caught off guard. Wait, seriously? Me too. She turned her head slowly, her green eyes locking onto mine. A faint smile played on her lips, but there was something unsettling about it. "Interesting choice," she said. "Why'd you pick it?" I shrugged, now feeling a bit self-conscious. "I don't know. It seemed unique, I guess. Plus, it's got enough detail to meet the requirements." She nodded, her gaze lingering on me for a moment longer before she turned back to her screen. "Porta-potties are fascinating, don't you think? They're everywhere, but people ignore them. They hold secrets, things people leave behind." For some reason, her words stuck with me. They were odd, but there was something captivating about her intensity. Before I could respond, she stood up, grabbed her bag, and left without another word. I watched her go, a strange mix of intrigue and unease settling in my chest. The next day I saw the woman again. This time she was sitting in the back of the lecture hall, sketching something in a spiral notebook. Mustering up my courage, I slid into the seat beside her, trying to act nonchalant. "Hey, porta-potty girl," I said, attempting a smile. She looked up, her eyes lighting up with amusement. "Hey, porta-potty guy." I laughed and we started talking. Her name was Lila, and she was a transfer student from a small town I never heard of. She had a quiet, almost enigmatic presence, but there was a warmth to her that pulled me in. We ended up bonding over our shared project, and soon we were meeting up regularly to work together. She turned out to be incredible with Blender, always adding intricate details to her model, things I hadn't even considered. But it wasn't just her skill that fascinated me, it was her obsession with porta-potties. At first it seemed harmless. She'd point them out whenever we walked across campus, commenting on their design or placement. "Look at that one," she'd say, nodding toward a weathered unit near the parking lot. "It's been there for years, I wonder what's inside." At first I'd laugh it off, thinking it was just a quirky interest. But as the weeks passed, her fixation grew more intense. She even started collecting photos of porta-potties, pinning them to a corkboard in her dorm room. She'd spend hours researching their history, their manufacturers, even the urban legends surrounding them. It was definitely strange, but I was also falling for her, and hard. Her passion, no matter how odd, was part of what made her unique. One night, we were walking back from the library when she stopped in front of a porta-potty near the construction site. It was old, its red paint chipped and faded. "This one's special," she whispered, her breath fogging in the cool air. I raised an eyebrow. "Special how?" She turned to me, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "It's been here longer than any of the others. I've heard stories about it. People say it's cursed." I chuckled, but her expression remained serious. "Cursed? Come on, Lila, it's just a porta-potty." She stepped closer, her voice low. "There's a legend that if you go inside at midnight and leave something behind, it takes a piece of you." A chill ran down my spine, but I forced myself to smile. "You don't actually believe that, do you?" She didn't answer. Instead, she just glanced at her watch. "It's 11:55. Want to test it?" I hesitated. The rational part of me wanted to laugh it off, but something in her gaze, intense, almost pleading, made me nod. "All right, let's do it." We waited until the clock struck midnight. Then, with a deep breath, Lila pushed open the door and stepped inside. I followed, the stale chemical smell hitting me as the door creaked shut behind us. It was cramped, the dim light from her phone casting eerie shadows on the plastic walls. "Ready?" she whispered, pulling a small silver ring from her finger. I frowned. "You're not seriously leaving that, are you?" She smiled, placing the ring on the toilet seat. "It's just a test." We waited, holding our breath. Nothing happened. I was about to laugh and to break the tension when I heard it, a faint tapping. It was like fingers drumming on the other side of the wall. Lila's eyes widened, a mix of fear and exhilaration flashing across her face. "Did you hear that?" I swallowed hard. Probably just the wind or something. But the tapping grew louder and more rhythmic, as if something was trying to communicate. Then a whisper, soft, guttural, and barely audible. "Stay." My blood ran cold. I grabbed Lila's arm, pulling her toward the door. "Let's go." She resisted for a moment, staring at the wall, transfixed. But eventually she nodded, and we stumbled out into the night, the door slamming shut behind us. We ran back to the dorms, laughing nervously, trying to convince ourselves it was just a prank or our imaginations running wild. But after that night, things changed. Lila became more obsessed, spending hours researching cursed porta-potties, compiling stories from across the country. She would disappear for hours at a time, visiting different sites, always returning with a distant look in her eyes. I tried to talk to her about it and to understand why she was so fixated, but she'd just smile and say, "They're doorways, you know, to something else." I didn't know what to make of it, but I loved her. Despite the strangeness, I loved her. So when she proposed one night, out of the blue, I said yes. It was impulsive, maybe even reckless, but it just felt right. We got married in a small ceremony at the courthouse, and for a while everything was perfect. We moved into a little apartment near campus, and Lila seemed to ease up on her obsession. She still talked about porta-potties occasionally, but it was more casual and less intense. I thought maybe she'd outgrown it, or that our life together had given her something else to focus on. Then, one evening, I came home from work to find the apartment empty. Lila's car was in the parking lot, but she wasn't inside. I called her name, checked every room, but there was no sign of her. Panic rising, I stepped onto the balcony, froze. There, in the corner of the lot, was a porta-potty. It hadn't been there that morning. It was old, weathered, with faded red paint and a door that hung slightly ajar. My stomach churned as I approached it, a sense of dread washing over me. "Lilla?" I called, my voice trembling. There was no answer. I reached for the door, my hand shaking, and pulled it open. Inside, it was empty, just a standard porta-potty with a toilet seat and a roll of paper. But on the walls, scratched into the plastic, were words that made my heart stop. I found the doorway, "Come find me." Below it was a symbol, crude and jagged, like the one she used to sketch in her notebook. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. This had to be a joke, a sick prank. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Lilla had always believed there was something more to those porta-potties, something beyond our world. That night, I sat in the parking lot, staring at the porta-potty, debating whether to go inside. Part of me wanted to believe she was just hiding, playing a game, but the other part, the part that remembered the tapping and the whisper, knew better. At midnight, I made my decision. I stepped into the porta-potty, closed the door, and left a small keychain on the seat, just as she had done. The air grew thick, the temperature dropping sharply. Then the floor beneath me shifted, and I felt myself falling, tumbling into darkness. When I opened my eyes, I was in a vast, shadowy expanse, the ground beneath me slick and uneven. And there, in the distance, was Lilla, standing beside another porta-potty, smiling at me. But it wasn't Lilla, not really. Her eyes were wrong, too dark and too empty. And as she reached out her hand, I realized with a sinking horror that I wasn't in another world. I was in their world, the things that lived inside the porta-potties, the things that had been calling to her all along. "Come," she said, her voice echoing strangely. "We've been waiting for you." I took her hand, not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice. The door had closed behind me, and there was no way back.